Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. I am Caleb, and today I am going to be bringing you my review for the very first novel in the Star Wars The High Republic Phase 2, and that is Path of Deceit by Tessa Gratton and Justina, Ireland. Real quick, before I start this review, I apologize for the lack of videos for the last couple of weeks. I have been very busy just in general, and I did not have a chance to get a video done for this book in soon after I finished it. I finished it at the time of recording this a little over a week ago, but by the time this video comes out, it'll be almost 2 weeks ago because I'm recording this a bit ahead of time. But so I do apologize that this video is so late and that there haven't been a whole lot of videos during this month, but life has just been very busy. But anyways, this, as I said, is the very first novel that was released in Phase 2 of the High Republic series. For those of you who may not know, Star Wars The High Republic is a book series and also comics and other stuff. There's some video games in development, some TV shows in development. It's like a big multimedia project that right now is centered in books and comics, but is expanding to other mediums as well. That is set hundreds of years prior to the Phantom Menace. It's not quite Old Republic. If you remember back in the EU, the Old Republic was thousands of years prior. This is more in the 150 to 300 years before the Phantom Menace. Phase 1, I believe, was 150 years prior, whereas Phase 2 is actually a prequel to Phase 1, and it takes place about 300 years prior to the Phantom Menace. And then Phase 3 will come out sometime later, and will take place after Phase 1, which is a decision that I, at first, was really confused by. But now, having read this book at least, it seems like, you know, there's no way of knowing it was the best decision necessarily, but I think it works, at the very least for this book, and we'll have to wait and see how it goes with the other ones. But it's a very interesting decision, and I think it's one that, at least for Path of Deceit, was a pretty decent and effective one. But anyways, I'm going to start talking a bit about this book itself. So some positive things with this book, and I think there are quite a few of them. First of all, this is one of the young adult novels of the High Republic. Phase 1 had 3 young adult novels, which I enjoyed all 3 of them to varying degrees. My least favorite one, Out of the Shadows, was probably my least favorite High Republic book. But then Midnight Horizon and Into the Dark I both thought were really good. And this one, I think, continues that trend of being maybe not as great as at least most of the adult novels that have released so far, but it's still a really, really solid book, and I would actually say this is probably my favorite of the young adult novels so far within the High Republic. In fact, if you've seen my High Republic ranking, which I did some time ago, this would probably be now my 3rd favorite High Republic book, behind The Rising Storm and The Fallen Star. And also, where this is a YA book, in my opinion, the strongest aspect of the past YA books in this series has been the characters. Not that the characters in the adult novels haven't also been great, because they certainly have, and many of my favorite characters are from the adult novels. But I think that the YA books, while I have not necessarily loved the plots, even though, again, they're not that they're bad, but I just haven't, loved the plots or anything. And I do think the plot in this book is easily the best one. But the characters, I think, in the YA books have been stellar. And easily, the highlight of the YA books, and that is definitely the case here as well. You follow primarily a fairly small cast of characters, maybe 4 or 5 characters total. You have 2 Jedi characters, 2 other characters that are part of a Force cult, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and then a 3rd character who's kind of the leader of said Force cult. First of all, you have 2 Jedi characters who are Zala, I believe, and Kevmo, who are the Master and the Apprentice, respectively. There are 1 or 2 other Jedi characters that show up in this book, but they're very, very brief. Zala and Kevmo are the primary Jedi characters within this book, and you can actually see Kevmo here on the cover. And then on top of that, you also have Yana Ro and Marda Ro, who, based on those names, one would assume are ancestors of Marchion Ro, who was the villain of the first phase of the High Republic, at least in terms of the adult novels. So I think the familial connection there is pretty clear. And then there's also the mother, who I believe is also on the cover here. I don't know for sure, like, which characters on the cover are which. I believe that's Kevmo, I think that's the mother, and I believe that is probably Marta. But the mother is basically the leader of this force cult called the Path of the Open Hand, which is a cult that has certain beliefs about the force and, you know, I wouldn't say necessarily worships the force, but is very kind of involved in the force and belief in it and all of these things, but they're not necessarily affiliated with the Jedi or the Sith, which is really interesting. But she's kind of the leader of the Path of the Open Hand, and then Marta and Yana Ro are both parts of this cult as well. And the plot of the book basically is that these two Jedi characters, Zala and Kevmo, are sent to this planet where the Path of the Open Hand operates, and they just kind of check things out, get a kind of talk to the people in it and all these things, and that's kind of a lot of the stuff in this book is conversations between different characters in the Path of the Open Hand and between the two Jedi characters, primarily Kevmo, but Zala does get involved in those conversations as well. And the Path of the Open Hand as well, I think if you read this book and also just kind of based on certain things about it, and if you are also familiar with Phase 1 of the High Republic, there are some very obvious connections between the Path of the Open Hand and the Nile, which were the main villain faction of the first phase of the High Republic. So that's very interesting to kind of see where that originates, and I'm very interested to see where that kind of goes in the future. And one thing I really liked as well is the Path of the Open Hand itself, being the Force cult that is not necessarily aligned with the Jedi or the Sith. In Star Wars, it's very rare that you find a group of people who are in some way connected to the Force, but are not Force wielders, or are not Jedi or Sith, or some sort of offshoot of those two factions. Typically, when it comes to Force-related groups within Star Wars, it's the Jedi and the Sith, or some other version of those two that maybe don't go by those names, but operate on similar sort of principles and stuff like that. Whereas the Path of the Open Hand is very different from that stuff. So it was very interesting to get something like that and see their perspective on the Force, how it's different from the Jedi and Sith, and kind of some of the discussions in here between characters of disagreements about the Force and the way that it should be used, if it should be used at all, what the Force really is. All this stuff is very interesting, and I really hope that the future books in Phase 2 kind of follow up on that sort of theme. And another positive thing with this book, and it'll be kind of the last positive that I really talk about, is the ending of this book. Now, I'm not going to get into spoilers for the ending, but the last 5 or 6 chapters of this book was really engaging. There are things that happen that in the past have been, I feel like, more reserved for the adult novels. Some very big things that happen that have very large implications for the rest of the High Republic series. Things that are in terms of the lore and the plots that we've already seen, and the plots that I assume we will see in the future are very important. The way that the events are handled, all of these things, feels like it's more reserved for the adult novels. And if you've read this book, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But the way it was done in here, and the fact that it was included at all, was very striking to me. And the way that it was written was just, I wanted to keep reading. And I only read this book in a couple of sessions anyway, so, you know, I just did not want to put it down once I reached that point. And it was just done super well. It ties in very interestingly to Phase 1. It answers some questions that I had after Phase 1, but it also brings up some more questions, and it, you know, kind of ties things together in a way where you don't find out everything related to what happens in the end of this book, but you're still getting something, but you still want to know more. And I just think it was done really, really well. As far as negatives with this book, there's really only a couple of things that I think are fairly minor. There were a couple of points in the book where it was starting to kind of lose me a little bit, and that was basically like kind of as it was getting to those last handful of chapters. So of course, once I hit that point, it kind of reeled me back in. But really, that's, I think, the only big issue that I really took with this book, is that, you know, there was a certain little bit of it that kind of lost me a little bit. But other than that, I absolutely loved Path of Deceit quite a lot. As far as a rating out of 10 that I would give it, I think I would probably give it an 8, maybe an 8.5, depending how I'm feeling. A very high score either way. I really, really did love this book. It's also quite short, and I think the length of it was actually fine. You know, if a book is this short, I'm probably more inclined to think, oh, it probably could have been a little longer, but honestly, I think the length of this book was just fine. So even that side of it was done really well. So overall, this was a fantastic book, a great start to Phase 2 of the High Republic. And if you have been reading the High Republic and you want to know what happens next, you're interested in Phase 2, but you're kind of thinking, it takes place before Phase 1. I don't know if it's really gonna interest me. I would say absolutely go for it and check this out, because not only is it an enjoyable book in its own right, but it also ties in some very interesting ways to the stuff that happens in Phase 1. But anyways, that's basically all I've got for you for this review, so let me know down in the comments if you have already read Path of Deceit and what you thought of it. If you have, the next book in the High Republic series, Convergence, I believe comes out in November, and I believe there's also a middle grade novel that comes out around that time as well. I haven't been reading the middle grade, so I'll probably just be picking up Convergence. That is pretty much all I got for you today, so thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.